Good evening, everyone. Whenever I tell people that I'm a poet, their response is usually really appreciative. And they say, wow, that's great, how do you do it? But then there's always a pause. And they pause, and then they say, I hope you don't mind me saying this, but I don't understand poetry. It's abstract for me, it's complicated. And I smile, because I understand where they're coming from. And I ask them why. So then they tell me that, when we were children, we had to read these poems that were written by, British lords, perhaps, who lived more than 100 or 200 years ago. And so that's why their experience with poetry, and nobody explained the context of it either, that, this was written 100 years ago, this was how life was then. And so that's why, to them, poetry was intimidating. So to them, I would say, you know what, well, there's a spectrum. Poetry like that existed and it's respected, but there is so many different types of poetry now, and that poetry, it captures our own experiences in our own lives, and we can connect with it. So I'd like to show you that and show you some functions of poetry by sharing a poem with you that I've written. And this poem is actually based on a true life experience, which I'll share with you after I'm done reading it. A rapid tongue thing going. Dear Mr. White, male Caucasian pediatrician, flattening my daughter's tongue and peering down her throat while remarking, she has that rapid tongue thing going. The tongue that you call rapid has 1,000 fires in it and 1,000 showers of lotuses. Perhaps we do speak as if we have to catch a train. Each word is poised at an overcrowded station on our tongues, bound for India and back within milliseconds. With our clove and cardamom-scented breath, we spread the fragrance of our pungent lives, and in the span of a minute, we find out how Auntie is doing after the flash flood in her village, and when the next sari sale will be, or where the best bitter gourds are available, or how the thesis on language acquisition is going. A rapid tongue can trace the world in one lick with the force of a ghost chili kick. So next time, please don't ask me why we talk so quickly, so harshly, so loudly, unless you want to ask nicely. Thank you. Now, this poem, the inspiration for this poem is an actual incident. We had just returned from India, and this happened around 10 years ago. My daughter was prattling away in Hindi, and the doctor looks at her and says, oh, she has a rapid tongue thing going. Now, I don't think he meant to be intentionally racist, but what he said bothered me. It pricked me somewhere. And so it went into my subconscious somewhere, and then some months later, I wrote that poem. So the moral of this story is, be careful what you say in front of a poet. But more specifically, the reason why I read this poem is to show you the functions of what poetry might be. So in the case of this poem, you could look at it in three ways. That this poem is a retort or a reply to racism. You said something which I didn't like, it sounded bad, you criticized my language, so this is what I have to say to you. You could look at it that way. Then you could say that this poem is a plea for cultural tolerance. There's so many languages out there, some sound soft, some sound harsh, but all of them convey our life experiences. So that way, it's a plea to be more understanding of what my child or what I am saying. Then, you could also look at it as a record of an event and the emotions that followed. I went, this happened, and this is how I felt about it. So in that sense, I wanted to show you that poetry is really malleable. We can take it like Play-Doh and make it into different shapes, the shapes of our life's experiences. Now, I'd like to show you how we can take the frame of this poem, but replace it with a different word, and then the context can be different, although the same power is there. Oops, sorry. All right, so I will read this. Oh, sorry about that. Yeah. Dear paternal, maternal, oh, by the way, I've replaced the word tongue with text, as in texting, which is something all of us, I think, can relate to. Dear paternal, maternal authority, paring down my phone while remarking, she has that rapid text thing going. The text that you call rapid has 1,000 fires in it and 1,000 showers of lotuses. Perhaps we do text as if we have to catch a train. Each word is poised at an overcrowded station of keys and fingers on our phones, bound for someone's eyes. A rapid text can trace the world in one lick with the force of a ghost chili kick. So next time, please don't ask me why we text so quickly, so frequently, unless you want to ask nicely. Thank you. So this is something which I hope many of you will go at home and try. I mean, find a piece of writing, preferably a poem, and replace it with words that mean something to you. That way you'll also get that sense of what it's like to create a poem and how malleable and friendly poems are. We fear it, and I want to take out that fear for all of you. So I want to, I want to talk about how poetry is relevant today. We live in a digital age, right? It's 2013. What do? We check our texts. We look at status updates. We tell people where we are, where we're eating, what we're going to do, right? We send emails. Everything is very powerful and brief, right? I like to think of it as the age of the economy of the word. For instance, you look at slogans also, like "Just Do It" by Nike. 3 simple words, but I think of that as poetry. Also, lately that commercial has been on, which I think has just kind of seeped into our minds. "You're my pumpkin, pumpkin, hello honey bunny." I've heard my neighbor sing it, I've heard my mother sing it, I've caught myself singing it. So, you know, there is poetry all around us. I like to think of it as being omnipresent. And so what I want to suggest to all of you today is that poetry is a powerful ambassador, and it has the economy of the word. Because unlike things like, say, fiction, or like essays, or it's a form which is briefer, but it's powerful. It goes in deep. And that's because we use metaphors and we use similes, but in the frame of a stanza, there's so much that you can convey. It, much like a photograph or much like a painting, it leaves an impression. Anyway, so in order to illustrate that, I'd like to share 2 beautiful poems by 2 lovely Indian poets. The first one is called 546 Andheri Local by Arundhati Subramaniam. In the women's compartment of a Bombay local, we seek no personal epiphanies. Like metal licked by relentless acetylene, we are welded. Dreams, disasters, germs, destinies, flesh and organza, odors and ovaries, 1,000-tongued, multi-spoused Kali on wheels. When I descend, I could choose to dice carrots or dice a lover. I postpone the latter. So I'll let all of you think about that. It's a lovely poem. The next poem I'm going to read for you is by a poet from Karnataka named Gopal Honalgere, and it's called How to Tame a Pair of Chappals. Don't leave them together. Don't allow them to talk to each other. They may form a trade union. Don't at any time leave them near a wall clock, law books, a calendar, the national flag, Gandhi's portrait, or a newspaper. They may hear about independence, satyagraha, holidays, working hours, minimum wages, corruption. Don't take them to your temple. They may at once know you are weak, your God is false, and they may bite you. Don't let them near your dining table. They may ask for food or cast their evil eyes on your dinner. First, use them only for short walks, then gradually increase the distance. They should never know the amount of work they have to do. Pull their tight straps loose. Let them feel happiness. They are growing bigger. Smear some old oil on the rough straps. Let them feel anointed. Now they are good subdued laborers, ready to work overtime for your fat feet. Thank you. So the first poem was about riding the local metro and about how these different lives come together, and it's the women's compartment. And so there's a certain strength in being together with other women, the shared experience of all coming or going together. And I love the way that Arundhati really captured that in a poem that's really small. It's just 5-6 lines. Then in this next one, Gopal Honalgere is making a social statement about class through a pair of chappals. So that's the beauty of poetry. It can take experience and cut to the core. So having said that, I think you'll all agree with me that poetry is very powerful, right? So now that we've established that, I'd like to talk about how this intersects with what I'm doing. Now, the poet Gopal Honalgere, he lived and died in obscurity. He wrote 6 books. They're all out of print. Nobody knew of him really. And it's poets like him who inspire me for the type of work I want to do. Now, a little bit about myself. Well, I can talk about modern Indian poetry first, though. Modern Indian poetry, it's a new entrant in a tradition we have here that's 5,000 years old. I just want to give you a little context before we move forward. So, it's largely proliferated after independence. It's new. It's an infant, actually. And there is an untapped mine, of history there, of how we have lived our lives after independence. I mean, there are feminist voices there. The Indian psyche is represented in all of these poems. Sadly, there's no proper archiving for it. When I was studying poetry 20 years ago, I studied Indian poetry, and I only found like 5 poets. And I was in the US at the time. I was born in England, brought up in the US and in India. But I was an Indian. And I wanted to read literature that maybe mirrored my experiences or explained my experiences or explained my history of where I came from. Now, I found that in fiction and I found that in nonfiction, but I didn't find that in poetry. So, it occurred to me, I thought, there's so many people who write in fiction. How can there not be poets writing in English? I was limited because I speak and read and write in English, right? So, I made my peace with it. And then I actually moved to India. And I moved here in 2008. And at that same time, this anthology was released. It's called 60 Indian Poets, and it was edited by the writer Jeet Dayal. I was so excited because I said, hey, there are not 10 poets. There are not 20 poets out there. There are actually 60 poets or more. And I was really excited about it. And the thing is, I started reading it, and their stories, many of the stories were like Gopal Honalgere's, that they wrote, and they died in poverty or obscurity. Their manuscripts were rotting. Their books went out of print. And that really touched me, because here we have a legacy that is being, in a way, destroyed by not being preserved, right? So this was the inspiration, in some ways, to the Great Indian Poetry Project. But I'll tell you exactly how it happened, because there's a particular day and a particular thing that happened that made me, inspired me to think of this within seconds. So I was also thinking about myself as a poet. What does it mean to be a poet? I'll write some poems, people will read them. Will I make a difference, right? So as I was thinking about all of these things, one Sunday, I opened the newspaper, and there was an article about the need to archive Indian poetry in Mint Lounge. So the quote, the very beginning of that article, has this quote: "What happens to my drafts, my manuscripts after my death? They will be kept in boxes and sold by the kilo to the raddiwala," is what? I stood up and I said, no, this can't happen. It really touched me, and I thought, as a poet and somebody who's passionate about poetry, I mean, you don't have to write poetry to be passionate about it. I said, this is what I would like to do. I would like to help and try archiving Indian poetry in English. So this is a big project. It's a vast project, and I've just started embarking on it. And what we want to do is to help preserve and promote Indian poetry in English. Why? It's a part of our history. It's legacy. And poetries, biographies, critical works are all scattered, are hard to find. And so I wanted to put everything under one roof. And actually, we're doing this virtually, so that anybody who wants to access this can just simply visit the website and see it, right? And I have to tell you something about poetry. Anyone who wants to publish, you go to any publisher's website, they say, we don't accept poetry. If you approach a literary agent, they say, we don't take on poets. So it's a very, very hard field to break into. I mean, you're certainly not doing it for the money, right? So this is, I just wanted to give an example of, this is what it might look like if you wanted to find out some information on a poet, and you'd visit our website. You'd see the name of the poet, you would see what year they were born, when they died, where they come from, about them, and then styles, themes, and imagery, links of them reading their work on the web, and more. In addition to that, we're also doing some other things. We've just formed a collective in which we are working with other poets to publish new voices. So people with first books we'll be publishing them, and that's called the Great Indian Poetry Collective, right? Then we're also going to do a dedicated online journal, and we're organizing poetry festivals. In fact, we organized an event last year called 100,000 Poets for Change. And believe it or not, 100 people showed up. So, that's really heartening to see that there are people who are, supporting poetry. So, another thing I wanted to talk about is, I don't know. It's something that we're doing called Poetry in Public Spaces, in which we would take poetry of women and we'd put them in posters with artwork, and we'll display them in public places all over India. And this was pioneered by a woman poet whose name is Shilpa Kameshwaran, who's collaborating with us. So these are some of the things that we'll be doing. Now, it's a journey I'm just beginning, so I don't know where it's going to take me. But I'm sure with the support of many people, we'll get far. And what we envision is an actual physical house, a museum/library, where we can archive all of these works and have people come in and explore. So I want to give all of you some homework, things to think about. That poetry is a powerful form of expression that we don't have to be intimidated by. And it doesn't have to be complicated. And if we can tweet, if we can have status updates, if we can text, why can't we write poetry, right? And so I want all of you to go home and think about writing a poem. And if you do, I'd love for you to send it to me. I'll read it for sure. So now I'd like to end with a beautiful poem by a poet who's very well known. Her name is, she's one of India's foremost poets, Eunice D'Souza. And the poem is called Unfinished Poem. I found your unfinished poem. There's a sun in the sky, and you are near me. And all should be right with the world, but something hasn't set, and it had better not be the sun. I could pinch a line from Neruda for you. I want to do with you what spring does with the cherry trees. There you have it, the apparent ease of love and poetry. Thank you.